Hello and welcome back to Hammer the Backlog, the weekly Warhammer painting, accountability and productivity blog that is now most definitely a video series. 2 officially makes it a series. This is our Q2 review, as you can see from the table in front of me, and Q3 target setting session. So we're going to be taking a look at everything that happened in Q2, seeing what went well, what went not so well, what went absolutely horribly, and then picking the targets for the next quarter. Before we start any of that though, the obvious thing is that one of the big milestones of Hammer the Backlog has happened. We've finished it, I've done it. I have completed, after 24 years of attic servitude, the Warhammer Fantasy 5th edition box set is fully complete. We have the Bretonnians on the right. The Bretonnians were the target of Q1, if you'll remember, if you watched that video. You can go back and watch it again if you'd like to see a little bit more about them. The Lizard Men over here on the left were the target of Q2. There are 52 figures here, which I painted over the last 3 months, divided into 13 weeks, at roughly 5 figures a week. The little skinkies were a lot easier on the brain and the painting hand, to be honest. They were pretty easy to knock out at 5 a week. The Saurus warriors with their scales and their teeth and their weapons and their bulk definitely took a lot more effort and energy. I learned a lot doing the lizards. I learned about painting natural colors, I learned about leathers, and I learned about metallic highlights, a lot of things that I didn't have on the Bretonnians. Overall, although I do love them, it really was the Bretonnians that won my heart in the end of the box set. If I were inclined to collect a further army, which I'm not going to do because this is Hammer the Backlog and this is about clearing the backlog, not increasing the size of the backlog. But if I were to collect a full army, it would probably be more of these guys first. Nothing wrong with these guys, I love them. They're little orange fellows, look at their little crest, they're fantastic. But the Bretonnians really caught my imagination and won my heart. Further to that, one of the other rocks that we had for this quarter was to get the Green Knight painted. The Green Knight is one of the most famous and beloved models that Games Workshop have ever produced. He came out in the mid-90s and really blew the world away with the detail, and the painting specifically by Mike McVeigh was incredible. So I was gifted this, as I mentioned in the last review, I was gifted this model by Andy from Mediocre Hobbies, and he was a challenge, let's say. A very interesting challenge, a very enjoyable challenge, and I learned probably a lot more on painting this one model than I did on the whole rest of this set. He's a fine cast model, and if you know anything about Bretonnia, you'll know that the symbol of Bretonnia is the fleur-de-lis, the famous French lily from the medieval period. And he is absolutely covered in fleur-de-lis. Unfortunately, the fleur-de-lis is not a great shape to try and catch in Games Workshop's fine cast resin, especially when they just released it in the late 2010s. So he was a little bit rough. Having said all of that, it is a real pleasure to have such a classic miniature painted well and added to my collection, especially, as I've said 100 times before, since he was a gift who sat in someone else's pile of shame for so long before entering the backlog. So it has been a very satisfying quarter from that perspective. So we had 3 rocks last quarter. Rock 1, Lizard Men, done. Rock 2, Green Knight, painted, photographed, up online, everything in place, done. Rock 3, edit, upload, record, and do all of the behind the scenes tomfoolery involved in making a YouTube video of the review. If you're watching this right now, that means that that has happened. So that means 3 rocks for Q2, all done and dusted. Even though it was a bit of a close one. So with 2 quarters down of the year, and you know, I know it's weird saying that in December, but with 2 quarters down of the Hammer the Backlog fiscal year, that leaves us with 2 more quarters. If you remember back to the first video, that means we have 2 more trays to choose from. Let's take a brief look at each of the trays. I'll talk you through my thought processes, and then we'll pick which one is going to be the rock for the next quarter. The first tray we have basically the entirety of the starter box for 2018's Blackstone Fortress, Games Workshop's Warhammer Quest sci-fi dungeon crawler game. I got this game as a Christmas present in 2018. I love the game. It's probably the game I've played the most of all of the things I've owned, but it has languished in a state of half-paintedness for way too long. So this is kind of what's left of the core box. We've got some of the Beastmen, we've got half of the Traitor Guardsmen, we've got some of what the internet loves to call the Wiggly Boys, but what the rulebook calls the Negavold Cultists. Also, we've got the couple of Rogue Psychers over here, and some of the remaining explorers in their half-finished state. This tray, which is quite packed, also has the dreaded Ambull expansion. It has the Ambull in about a 1/3 painted state. We lovingly call her Philippa. This is Philippa. And it has the 2 boar worms, which are small work. Also, the final part of this tray, from the Blackstone Fortress perspective, is the Traitor Command set. We have a Chaos Ogryn and the Chaos Commissar over here. All in all, that is about 50 points, 50 Hammer the Backlog points worth of models. Each of these unpainted minions, 1 point each. A completely unpainted explorer, I'd like to dedicate a week per explorer and really get them painted up nicely. A half-painted explorer, I'm going to count them as between 2 and 3 points, depending on how far along the process they are. Finishing off Philippa and her 2 babies, probably about a week's work there, so 5 points. And then the Chaos Ogre and the Commissar, another week maybe, so about 50 points. That means this tray has a bit of space, and you can probably see over here these little resin white fellas over here. These are very exciting. I'm pretty excited about them. They are from a small company called Imperialis Miniatures, and they are the Mercenary Swordsman models. They came out this year, I think in October. If you remember the history of Hammer the Backlog, if you've read the blog or if you've seen the earlier videos, you'll know it was the 1996 PlayStation video games Dark Omen and Shadow of the Horned Rat that got me into this whole mess in the first place. And these resin home-produced models look strikingly like, but legally distinct from, the Grudgebringer infantry from that game. So they are something that is really close to the heart of Hammer the Backlog. That's how they've ended up on that tray. Our second tray is the second half of Blackstone Fortress. It is the later expansions, including the first big box expansion, Escalation, which has 5 explorers, 7 cultists and a firebrand. Then we had No Respite, the Plague Marine expansion. I've already done the Plague Marines, so we only have 6 Poxwalkers from that expansion. We have Deadly Alliance, where you finally teamed up with a Zoat. And the final expansion, which I haven't played yet, Ascension, which has 2 of these big Guardian drone fellas. As you can see, there are a lot fewer models on this tray than on the first tray. But this tray has a lot more characters, a lot more explorers, a lot more big monsters. So even though there are fewer models on this tray, it's about the same amount of work. And that's the whole point of the Hammer the Backlog system. I'm breaking it down into how much work and effort I'm willing to put in. So now the decision has to be made. Which of these 2 trays will become the main painting focus for quarter 3, the first half of the year 2023? But you know what? It strikes me that we're in this lovely fantasy set with our green 90s tablecloth and our blue sky background, and we're talking about science fiction. We're talking about the grim, dark future of Warhammer 40,000, and don't ignore the swordsman for a moment. So I think it's time for a change of scenery. What do you think? So, fantasy is dead, medieval fantasy is dead, long live grim, dark, far future science fiction. For the time being. Hammer the Backlog is going to swing back over the next couple of years. I have about 10 years worth of models to paint here. Half of them are fantasy, half of them are science fiction. But since we have 2 quarters ahead of us and both are heavily dominated by Blackstone Fortress, we're going to be in the Blackstone Fortress set for a little while. I've made the decision, while I was doing that, that the next quarter's targets are going to be tray 1. So that means the targets are: get the Blackstone Fortress core box painted, photographed and online. Get the dreaded Amble expansion painted, photographed and online. Get the Traitor Command expansion painted, photographed and online. And finally, recreate a 90s style box art with the Imperialis Miniatures Mercenary Swordsmen Regiment, who aren't, under any circumstances, the Grudgebringer Infantry. So that's the next 3 months. That's going to take us over Christmas and into March. The interesting thing about this is because we've set the Q3 targets and we know the annual targets, we also pretty much know what we're going to be doing in Q4. In total, this is about 60 points worth of miniatures, which gives me about 12 weeks work out of a 13-week quarter, which leaves 1 week free to either take a holiday or maybe do something that's not on this tray, a little surprise or a little a palette cleanser, if you will, something for me to work on separately. Thank you very much for watching this video. Thank you very much for following Hammer the Backlog. If you don't mind, you could give a little like, a share and a subscribe down below. It really helps the YouTube channel grow. If you'd like to see more photographs and more painstaking step-by-step detail on how all of this has happened, please visit the website at www.hammerthebacklog.com. That's updated every Thursday come hell or high water. Model pictures are also posted every week to Instagram at hammer_the_backlog. Hammer the Backlog is also on Twitter at hammerbacklog. And how about you? Do you have a huge backlog of unpainted miniatures that you need to get done? If you do, and you think this is a system that would suit you, if you think the accountability and weekly productivity works, write a comment down below or send me a message on Instagram or on Gmail. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from other people who are doing similar projects, even if they're not following the same weekly point-by-point scheme. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks for watching this update, and I will see you again in 3 months when everything on this tray will be fully finished.